Okay, welcome back to a special segment, which is The Doctor and the Farmer, where I sit down with farmer Jake Wolki and we discuss pertinent topics that are related to human health, regenerative farming, and food systems. So, Jake, how are you, mate?
I'm good, thank you, Dr. Max. I am on the back of a few weeks of battling some uh, poor health. I think I got mycoplasma. It's like a pneumonia style of infection. I wasn't able to, when you're self-employed and you're running a farm, if you get crook, there's not always the opportunity to lay low. So I've been fighting this for about 3 weeks now, and I'm starting to come good, but it's been a slow journey.
Well, so you had mycoplasma atypical pneumonia. You were on antibiotics, were you?
No, I called around to get into the GP last week, and I called 7 different practices in Albury, and they were all fully booked out for that day. And then finally, one said that they could see me, but they wanted me to come in with a COVID test. And it just broke my brain that at middle of 2024, they still wanted me to come in. It just like completely it broke me, and I just hung up on her, and I never went into my appointment. So I got home and I started dosing up on the colloidal silver, and I've been feeling a lot better ever since I got into it.
So, how did you know you had a mycoplasma? Did you get a respiratory PCR
I don't
or
know.
sputum sample?
That's why I said I think I had it, because my wife's mother and I were sick in lockstep together for about 2 weeks, and then she went to the GP and she got diagnosed with mycoplasma and put on antibiotics.
Okay.
Um,
So,
so,
self-diagnosis and self-treatment and
oh yeah, and
cla cla
I
classic
didn't even use
Australian
Doctor Google. I didn't
cla
even use Doctor Google. I just used hearsay from a friend.
and and classic Australian rural Australian reluctance to engage with medical care. So, you're hitting them all, mate.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I just need to just stay positive and drink more bone broth, right?
Well, yeah, there's that we can talk a lot about that, but I really want to talk about what's going on in farming and yeah, what I know that you guys have been in drought for a long time. Now it sounds like you've got a bit of rain, which is probably welcome.
Yeah, definitely. We've essentially had one of the driest autumns on record for the region here, and all the conventional farmers around the area were feeding out an enormous amount of hay, and the hay's all gone. If you want to buy hay in to feed your animals, it's all either getting freighted in from a long way away or very expensive or both. And it's been really interesting to watch it happen, and something that I've never really considered. But you watch all the paddocks drying up and everyone feeding out hay, and we've ended up feeding out a little bit of hay as well. We probably started feeding out about 3 months later than everyone else, just because we had pasture up our sleeve. And then when we did start feeding out, we started feeding a lot less per head than everyone else. And, it just comes back to our management systems and, the levers that we pull. But something that I never really thought about is, obviously we're a grass-fed and finished operation and we don't feed our herbivores grain. But a lot of the graziers around the place, when the hay started running out, they started ordering grain and feeding it out to their animals to get themselves through, because it was so much easier to access. Like if you want hay, you've got to get online and go through all the different vendor websites and ring up and negotiate and order a truck. But if you want some grain, you just call the mill and order it, and it turns up the next day blown into your silo. And when hay gets really expensive, the grain is actually very compelling in terms of dollars per energy unit. So it was just really interesting. It's the first time I've really come through a dry period like that with my eyes wide open, watching everyone's different management techniques. But we've had rain now, like you said, the last few weeks we've had a good amount. And we've also had some sunny days scattered in there. So we're starting to grow a bit of grass. We've got 1 month of winter left. And then, with the amount of rain we've had the last couple of weeks, it doesn't really matter what happens at the start of spring. It's going to go off with a bang. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, sounds good. And a couple of things that we can talk about in this segment. One is the upcoming Regenerate event, which you are going to be speaking at. Your lovely wife, Anne Wolke, is going to be catering. Uh, and it's basically in your home turf, which is Splitters Creek, which is very close to Albury. The other thing that we could touch on is what we always seem to talk about in Nguni cattle, which is, I think, a passion of both of ours. And I talked to Dirk Loose a couple of weeks ago now, but maybe we can touch on some points there, and maybe some more regulatory kind of topics, and that are relevant to expanding the access of regenerative produce to the people directly. And I think that there's lots of barriers in Australia, in every state of Australia, for farmers to basically process and access a direct customer base. And then maybe finally we can also touch on your new dairy cow and and what it's like to have a source of dairy right on the property. But happy to talk about whatever one of those, whatever you think you'd be interested to start with.
Yeah, sure. Well, the regulation thing's interesting. Like, obviously, we run a commercial kitchen in town and Cafe Musette. And when you first build a commercial kitchen and you've had no experience and you're reading through the compliance, it's very daunting to get going. But once you're actually up, we've had quite a few regulations change over the last couple of years. We get audited every 6 months by the local food authority, the local council, and they let you know that there's one little update here and one little update there. And they're very easy to take in your stride once you're up and operating. But to actually get going and wrap your head around it in the beginning is requires a lot of energy, a lot of brain power. And only, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, I had the owner of a tannery, a very large tannery that exports an enormous amount of leather goods around the country. He came into the butchery and he wanted to talk to me because he exports a lot into Europe, and the European Union is putting a lot of pressure on the Australian tanneries that they're working with new green quotas, environmental commitments, and another one was they wanted traceability. So what he was telling me was the European Union wanted to be able to trace every hide back to the farm and then have insights onto how green the farm was. And, did they have solar and what was their carbon plan and all this sort of stuff. And the gentleman running the tannery was saying that it was impossible for him because of, privacy around information in Australia doesn't let him access those details. And it's just a bureaucratic nightmare, all these dysfunctional systems trying to talk to each other. But what I found was really interesting talking to the man that owned the tannery was that it's been in his family for generations, and he was talking about all the compliance. He just put in acres and acres of bitumen down on the road and then ran the water pipes on it to use that as a passive water heating and all this stuff. And he said, Jake, if we tried to get going today, it's impossible. He said you couldn't. The amount of cash needed, the amount of institutional knowledge and connections needed, there is no way you could just get going from a stop-start. He said, my grandpa started in his garage. And, they've had the opportunity and the fortune and, they've made their own luck with generations of work, but they were able to ease into this regulatory burden. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't really understand. They look around and they go, small farmers are complaining about regulation, but all the big guys have got it down pat. Yeah, they've been easing into it over the last 100 years, some of these businesses. And what you're essentially creating is a monopoly. If we can't get in with the same, passive entry that these other people got in, it's restricting competition and free trade, and we're really setting up monopolies in these enterprises.
Yeah, it reminds me, to draw an analogy. I speak to Tristan Scott, who's an EMF and health expert, and he described what is happening in urban areas where there's imposition of newer telecommunications technologies, and they simply just add the 5G repeater towers on top of existing 3 and 4G networks, and essentially you're getting a layering. You're just getting a layering of new sources of radio frequency radiation, which is having profound health impacts. But to draw that analogy to what you're describing with regulation in business and farming. And it seems like there's just a continued adding of new and new regulation and compliance tests that are over existing ones. So to me, it appears like there's more and more difficulty in maintaining compliance or getting a start, whether this is in a venture, whether it's an agricultural venture or otherwise, meaning it's just more and more difficult compared to previous generations.
Yeah, definitely. And it's impacting our business right now, Max. We're going through reviewing what we're doing. Obviously, at Christmas last year, we made the decision to put a pause on broilers. Our intensive enterprises, which is the broilers, which are meat birds, the egg layers, and the pigs, all require a lot more compliance and governance than extensive agriculture, which is beef and sheep, because they're just grazing, so their outputs are lower. And it's getting to the point that keeping up with it all, at the moment we've got the bird flu outbreak in Australia, and they're putting stop work orders on farms, not allowed to ship eggs, not allowed to move birds off farms, having to do all these tests on your feces, sending it off to labs to see if your flock's infected all this time. And when you've just got 1,000 birds in the paddock, it becomes quite onerous, and it doesn't make sense. So we're in a little bit of a period of consolidating our enterprise so that we can have each of the enterprises running at a scale where it's viable to deal with the bureaucracy and, worthwhile digging the heels in, but also selecting and choosing a broad enough range of enterprises that, it's really complementary to the landscape still, and we're not regressing to a monoculture type production again, which is really what the system wants to bully you into. It's set up for monoculture, and that could just be sheep, or that could just be egg layers, or that could just be canola. So you got your work cut out for you when you're wanting to run a mixed enterprise farm, and we've had a lot going on the last few years, and we're being cornered into a bit of a consolidation period.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the history of these bureaucracies, if you look back in, the Soviet Union, they inevitably make it just more and more difficult for people to simply operate, and you get to a stage where you're breaking some regulation. I mean, not to say that's happening in Australia currently now, but historically that was what happened. In the Soviet Union, there was nothing you could do. You were without breaking some kind of obscure or arcane regulation that had been written down. But I think the crux of this, like the bureaucratic process, is favoring centralization, and whether it happens explicitly or implicitly, these regulations favor the big players, and sometimes that happens very deliberately through things like regulatory capture, where big industry kind of lobbies or influences the lawmaking process to essentially favor their operations and pull the ladder up behind them, making smaller players and smaller entrants much more difficult to therefore become a competitor. But I mean, the issue here is that food production is it's not a small thing. It's not like a side industry or a small kind of thing in society. This is about feeding people, and to me, the more barriers and the more difficulties and the more regulation and that gets put in place in terms of simply growing, very 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 high quality food in a way that we have always grown it, the more that's become difficult or onerous, the less people are going to do it, the more industrialized the whole food system is going to become. And we saw during COVID, particularly in the US, the consequences of that. And they had, they had these big meat processing plants and huge meat processing plants, and when they got shut down from a biosecurity infection control point of view, it created ripples all the way through the supply chain, because that is essentially how people were getting their food, via supermarkets, via centralized supply chains, via these huge meat processing um, uh, facilities. So to me, it's creating this centralization is creating very much vulnerability in a food system, and essentially taking the final product, further and further away from what we've eaten as humans for hundreds of thousands, millions of years.
Yeah, yep, you're absolutely right. It's a battle, and that's why we so appreciate all the support we get for the customers that do support us and stick by us. It doesn't make, we can't do anything unless we sell what we're producing. I know you and I have good crossover, and a lot of your listeners are supporters of our produce. And the last couple of weeks, I've spent more time the last 3 weeks packing orders and managing freight logistic headaches than I have farming, to a factor. And for the most part, our base is very forgiving and compliant, because they can see the real barriers that we're up against. That it's on every side. So, I really believe that if you want to be selling food direct to consumer, your farm business either needs to be smaller than ours, and you need to be very content to have a tick along homesteading. There's some people that have these little farm businesses, and they're very happy to be micro and degrowth and just tick along and have a very simple operation and simple living lifestyle, which is fantastic. If people want that, we think there's space for all types of farms. Or you need to be, I've been crunching the numbers lately, and I think you need to be at least twice the size of ours. But the reality is you can't get there without going through the growing pains to get there. And you said before about in Russia, and you couldn't help but be non-compliant. I listened to a podcast yesterday where Elon Musk was talking about, with SpaceX, the federal government in America had made it very clear to him that he could not hire anybody unless they were an American citizen. And then another compliance group came after him, told him that he had to be giving jobs to refugees before they'd become citizens, as a employment process that they had. And he had to take them. They were both pressuring him, and he was damned if he did, damned if he didn't. And he had to take them to court. And I would imagine exhaust tens of millions of dollars to defend himself. And the only reason that he was able to navigate out of that bureaucratic hell is because his business was defensible, and he could actually hire his own bureaucrats to plead his case. And it sucks, and it doesn't pass the pub test. And everyone that hears that just rolls their eyes and knows it's a nonsense. But the reality is that is the system that we're in. And we can do community, and we can do farmers markets, and you can slip somebody some homemade salami under the table at the farmers markets for a bit of cash, or all these cool little things, and that's all fine. But it, our plan and our process is to grow the business into minimum scale viability. How do you know if you're at minimum viable scale? You're able to defend yourself from bureaucratic pressure. I think that's one really good benchmark there, and it's coming for all of us. You read books on guys like Joel Salatin in America, and he's fought so much. He's written books about it, about the amount of bureaucratic pressure he's fought, and really the way he navigated through that and the way he came out in one piece out the other end is completely reliant on his own smarts and tenacity and good luck. Like, he just scrapped like a honey badger for decades, and he got through them. The reality is a lot of people don't have the smarts, they don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the grit and the conviction, and they're going to give up, and the commons are just going to keep losing. So it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I've watched a lot of colleague farms like mine around the region shut up in the last 12 months because they can't handle the workload and the finances. And, we're in a system that's stacked against us. So again, it all just comes back to people that want to support chemical-free farming and regenerative agriculture, actually putting the money where their mouth is and taking that warts and all.
Yeah, it's the single most important thing I think that people can do is if they have even a slight interest in these topics or a slight interest in maintaining access to food in the form that their ancestors ate and not in a way that's been funneled through an industrialized system and without any transparency into the inputs that have been used in its raising and processing, then simply buying from a farmer is so critical. And there is amazing operations in every state, and I want to make that clear. Obviously, we have a partnership, and I'm promoting what you're doing with an affiliate code, Dr. Max, and that is and the reason, and we've talked about this before, because there is certain voices within small scale agriculture really kind of only sell to your territory and really only sell in your local area. But as we've discussed, who's selling into Burke Street, Melbourne, or who's selling into Surrey Hills in Sydney. So the point is that these people too need access to regenerative meat. And talking about scale is that you've got to a scale where you're actually able to start shipping frozen into these areas, and that's something that I think is filling a very important need. But I always encourage people to go out and do their own research and find their local farm and buy directly from them. There's so many great operators that are now getting started, and I think Instagram and social media has really helped because it is very personal and people can share stories. The farmers can share stories and the realities of farm life. And I think that's also a really powerful tool to connect people back to their farmers and the origin of their food. So that's a real, I think that's a strong advantage in this battle for for maintaining access to human appropriate food.
And you mentioned before about people being upset about shipping into their postcodes. And I know I talk about this a lot, and I don't want to appear like I'm victim mindset about the whole thing. But the way my brain works, Max, is half the pork we consume in Australia comes out of factory farms from Brazil. And if there's somebody out there who's willing to pay for Australian grown pasture raised pork, and my website makes that easy and simple and compelling for them, I'm going to get the meat to them, because for me, that's a win for everyone. It's a win for the pigs. It's a win for the Australian economy. It's a win for the environment. It's a win for their health. Maybe there would be a pig farmer a little bit closer, but it doesn't mean it's more accessible. So I think a lot of that stuff we just need to get out of our own way and just become business people and put effort into meeting the market where it is. If somebody says they want it, we've got to facilitate getting it to them. I just had a phone call from Matthew Evans, who's famously known as the fat pig farmer down in Tasmania. He's had a few ABC programs, just written a book on milk, which I've ordered, which I'm really excited to read. And he's running an event down in Tasmania in the start of December this year that he's invited me to come and present at. There's going to be it's a 2-day event with 3 or 4 tents of continuous lectures all day long. So it's going to be a really nutrient dense session down there. And Matt and I had a really interesting conversation on the phone call, because he's seen me flag out farmers markets. And he told me that he wanted his event to be a safe space, and he wanted it to be a safe space where I could express my apparent disdain for farmers markets, but also didn't want me to trigger everyone that are farmers market enthusiasts. I thought that was a funny pickup, but I think that's going to be a great event. And those little things are important. Like we're talking about making headway and improving the commons and that sort of thing, and turning up at one of these events as a producer or a consumer, and networking and listening and learning. I think they're fantastic. We've got our Regenerative event coming up. It's only in a couple of weeks, and that's your first 2-day event. I think I'm really excited to get along there, and my favourite presentation that I'm looking forward to is Mr. David Bushell, organic agronomist extraordinaire. I'm quite looking forward to seeing what he's going to bring for us.
Yeah, I mean, the point of the Regenerative Health podcast is to really give a voice to, I think, people who are doing exciting things in the fields of human health, light, circadian rhythms, and ancestral diets and regenerative farming. And I think what David is doing, his perspectives is coming from a really conventional background, and then advocating for regenerative practices is going to be very exciting. Talking about this again, it's about active. I don't want to use that word. That sounds a little bit radical. But talk about making a difference. And for someone who isn't a farmer, well, maybe if you really care about this food system and you care about access to nutrient dense food, pure animal protein, as Texas Slim would say, then you can obviously start by sourcing from a farmer. But beyond that, you can have. I think there needs to be some degree of involvement and participation in the political process for the advocation of ideas and topics that impact this process. So what that might look like is making it known to local members of parliament, local, state, federal, that issues of food sovereignty, of food intelligence are important to you. And I know the Food Sovereignty Alliance that's in Victoria, based, I believe Tammy Jonas leads that. I mean, that is one such organization that is kind of championing these topics, but they don't need to be the only one, I think, to really make some progress. And people have been in touch with me and farmers who are following the holistic approach and perspective that I'm taking, and one of them has said just as simple as, we need to make it. It could be something like maybe a 3-day, 5-day hygiene course that really strips back the bureaucracy to allow on-site killing, processing, and sales. And that way, the cost of the final product of the meat of the beef would go from 30, 60 kilos, $60 a kilo for, for porterhouse steaks or New York strip steaks, to 30. Imagine if the quality of the product, because it's regenerative, it's just the fully grass-fed, the highest quality product. What if that were cheaper than Coles, or cheaper than the butcher? And it could be if those overheads were slashed by on-site processing and butchering. That would, I think, be a complete game changer, because it would make financial sense to buy the better quality product.
Yeah, on site would be a game changer. One of our biggest costs that we have every month on our business is transport, whether that's me driving the animals to the abattoir or me hiring a subcontractor to take them on the truck. Like, it ends up being hundreds of dollars per head. We have to sell all the sausages and half the mince to recoup the freight and the slaughter charges on those animals. They're extremely large and meaningful amounts, and we've already got the processes in Australia to legally facilitate similar activities to on-site slaughter. So what I mean by that is, there's a company in Howlong called Discovered Wild Foods, and they're an above board company, and as a licensed deer hunter, you can go into the bush and shoot a deer out in the paddock, up in the hills, and then you gut it, you take the head off, you take the feet off, you hang it on the back of a ute on an appropriate frame that's been made specifically. You put the liver and the heart back in the chest cavity, and you might have 1, you might have 10 on the back of your ute, and you drive it to the abattoir that night. It gets there within an hour of sunrise, and the abattoir receives it, inspects it, stamps it, and then that animal has a legal supply chain to go out to direct animal consumption. And I spoke to the guys at that facility 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I said, have you ever looked into doing exactly what you do, but with a body of beef? Like, could I shoot a body of beef in my paddock and gut it and skin it and put it on the back of the ute and drive it to you, and you skin it, inspect it and stamp it. And they said, we can't. We've been told in no uncertain terms that that's not appropriate. The process isn't set up there for it. And you just think to yourself, why? Like, we know so much more about that body of beef that, has been under our care and stewardship in the paddock. We know everything about it compared to that random deer in the forest. But it's just bureaucracy. It's another layer of compliance. It's different systems and regulation parties that don't want to collaborate and talk and deal with each other. And it sort of just breaks your brain a little bit when you realize we can do it with this class of animal, but not with this class of animal. So, anything that can shift the needle, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I just think we need to download some sort of common sense and repurpose some systems and infrastructure that we already have in the system. Like my bicycle shop in town, we've just been given notice by the road authority that we're losing our 14 street side car parks. And we said, why? They said, we're turning it into a bus stop. Now, Max, if you walk out the front of my shop and you stand on the curbside where we're losing our 14 parallel parking car parks, and you look to your left, about 20 metres away, undercover, there are about 15 bus parks. And you will never see more than one bus there at any time. So we said to the road authority, why can't you use them? They don't belong to us, the road authority. They belong to the railway station, and it's a different state party, and we don't have access to them, and we don't deal with them. And we just think, like, what a waste of a resource. You've got a dozen bus parks undercover, completely empty, never being used, but it's the wrong department. You boys can't talk, have a big conversation and sort it out. And you just see that across every different industry. And, unfortunately, food's probably the worst of it.
Yeah, the point about transport costs making up a large proportion of your costs, it makes me think about energy. And when the cost of energy goes up in an economy, it has all these rippling effects that a lot of people would have no idea about. And if fuel somehow becomes more expensive, then you could see how that would, with this extensively bureaucratic process in place that stipulate that you have to transport and process these animals off site. It's therefore you can see that direct line to more expensive meat prices, because you have to dance through all these hoops and jump over all these obstacles because of this established regulation. So low cost energy, I think, I know that's something it's a controversial topic in this day and age when we're talking about the various sources of energy, and it's not something I want to talk about, but I think I will. I think I will, because I just recorded a very, very, very interesting podcast with an astrophysicist, and we're talking about indoor lighting and how essentially we've created a diabetic indoor environment for essentially everyone in the world by stipulating a minimum efficiency for indoor lighting. And essentially what that looks like is there's a minimum lumens per watt that lighting has to emit in the US, and I believe that's just influencing the energy standards in other countries. But what that essentially means is that all the light bulbs are now isolated blue LEDs, which is about 10% or less of the solar spectrum, and they're completely devoid of infrared light, which is a critical, important input into metabolism, mitochondrial function, energy generation in your cell. So that law or that regulation is being put in place in the name of the acronym that starts with C, and the double C acronym. And it's interesting because the same justification is being used for transitioning to a plant-based economy, a plant-based food system. So and all these are supposed to be in the name of human health, because of the impending disaster that's coming from a climactic point of view. But what the point that I made to Bob in that interview, which I'm looking forward to releasing, is that there are much more proximate problems that are actually caused by the intended consequences of this bureaucratic interventionism, which is as I mentioned, creating these diabetic indoor environment that's contributing to chronic disease, and by depriving people of animal foods through this pressure against a red meat and animal-based agriculture. So I want to just flag that as what I believe is the common underlying cause of human health issues in today's day and age, which is perhaps well-meaning, but ultimately misguided bureaucratic intervention that is taking us away from an ancestrally appropriate food diet and an ancestrally appropriate life diet.
Yeah, absolutely. And the talking about the cost of energy, we've watched generational. I remember reading about a gelati business over in Italy that closed down after operating 3 or 4 generations because of the new green energy compliance and how much their electricity bill went up, and they just couldn't afford to run the place. And you hear that and you go, poor little business over in Italy. You'd never think that could happen here to us in Australia. But, I'm spending $500 a week on fuel, which just sort of blows my mind a little bit. Like it's a multiple of what it used to be, just with the way that prices are gone. We're $7,000 a quarter on electricity just in the butchery alone, and that's after 20 kilowatts of solar has subsidised some of our use. And I just had a phone call from the main abattoir that we use. They're in Victoria. They've been given notice that their gas bill is going up 60%. So to give your listeners a bit of context, and I just think this is just curious stuff about what's happening in the marketplace with inflation and the rise of the cost of living. 2 years ago, to slaughter a body of beast cost me $86, and I got the bag of offal back. So I got the kidney, heart, liver, tongue, tail, got it with me. Today, as it stands, to slaughter that same animal cost me $140, and if I want to buy my offal back off them, it's another $80. So it's gone from $86 to 200. Was that $220? Something like that. And we've just been given notice that it's going to go up again because their gas prices are going up 60%, and the abattoirs run on gas. It's fast, immediate, plentiful, and that's what they've been set up on. So we're going to be looking at slaughter prices going up, by a factor of 3 or 4 in 2 short years. It's the reality that we're dealing in, but it's a lot to keep an eye on as a small business who's trying to do. We're busy literally collecting the eggs and moving the cows, and it's a complicated landscape to manage in at the moment.
Obviously pass those costs on to the consumer, and what's going to change when the consumer decides that they're sick of paying $100 a kilo for mince, and then they show up at their local MP's office with torches and pitchforks. I mean, I don't know what it's going to take, but if you look back in history, food crises is what set off the Arab Spring. I mean, that I believe was it 2011 when some gentleman self-immolated in Tunisia. It was set off because there was a spike in the wheat price. So I think people are quite sensitive to the rises in the cost of food. I mean, that's why I can't remember which Roman emperor. I mean, his policy was bread and circuses. It's the entertainment and cheap food. So that's how you placate the populace. And when there's a loss of ability to maintain access to reasonably priced food, and the cost of food as a proportion of people's total cost of living increases, then maybe that's what it's going to take to be the catalyst to break down these onerous regulations preventing things like on-farm slaughter. Because if that keeps going up and you keep being forced to route all these kilometers to a centralized processing facility, I wonder how at some point you're going to have a factor of 2, factor of 3 cheaper costs if you did it on farm. So maybe there's going to be an inflection point where they just become so compelling that maybe regulations are able to be changed to allow a more cheaper processing. I don't know if that sounds like that could ever happen to you, or whether that is anywhere near happening.
Well, for the listeners to picture, Max, like we've done on-farm slaughter before. I had 2 cattle that I traded in. I bought them at a year old, and we grazed them and finished them, and they were really spooky animals, and they never calmed down. Normally animals get to our farm and calm down very quickly, because when you're moving them into a fresh paddock every day, they learn that you're their best friend, and they see you in their stomach grumbles, and they think, oh goody, here's a fresh salad bar. These 2 never calmed down, and every time we got them in the yards, they jumped out. They literally jumped over these 5-foot panels. And they had horns, so they weren't the friendliest animals. So we made the decision to do an on-farm slaughter with them, because it was just the really only option to do it. And we just stacked up the home freezers of, our families, right? What that looked like was a on-site butcher, and this is legal in Australia for on-farm, on-home use, but you can't sell the product, right? But we had an on-site butcher come to the farm. He had a 22 Magnum rifle, so you could use a $600, $800 rifle, and a bullet that probably cost you 20 cents. And he put the rifle over the car bonnet, shot both these animals in the head, and we watched it, and the animals were dead before their heads hit the ground. Like, you watch the way they crumbled. They were completely gone before they even hit the ground. It was an absolute split second. And then we go over, and he, gets a little bit graphic, but you bleed the animal out, you get all the blood out of the system, and he gutted them both. And then we put some chains through their legs and lifted them up with a tractor. And he had like a reciprocal saw, battery powered one, and he cut them in half. And then with the tractor, we used to put them in a cool room, and we did 2 bodies of beef, all said and done in the cool room, scun, gutted, ready to chill, in way less than an hour. And so what we're talking about is a tractor, which every farm's probably got anyway. You're talking about a portable cool room on a trailer that, might be about a $10,000 or $12,000 investment, an $800 gun, a $300 reciprocal saw, and 1 hour's labor of a professional, say it's $100. And you could do that. I've never, ever heard of anyone getting sick from eating on-farm slaughtered animals. Everyone in our community up here, we're in thick with all the homesteaders and homeschoolers up here, and everyone's going out on the weekend, knocking a chook on the head, or processing the backyard lambs. And you've just never heard about it. It just, it doesn't happen. And if we were to look at my $220 kill fee, plus hauling the animal to the abs, which is probably a cost of $200 per animal, and then I pay $100 to get it back from the abs. So we're at about $500 per cow just to get the thing transported for slaughter and back to the butchery, versus on-farm. The true on-farm cost is probably $150 over time when you amortize out those infrastructure costs. So I just think that we can do things more efficiently. We can still do them to a really high level. There can still be regulation and governance and oversight on farm. You can log your temperatures of your cool room. You could take an E. coli test. You could rub a swab on the body of the beef and do a little home test and record your bacteria counts. And all these things are possible. But whether they're likely or ever going to happen is a different thing. But it is an interesting conversation to actually have to crunch the numbers, and we could do it very efficiently here on farm.
Yeah, it sounds like at current prices at 2x at least more expensive in the current to push it through that centralized processing. And as you said, those operations would become even more cheaper when the costs of that, the capital, the rifle, and the reciprocating saw, as you mentioned, amortize out pretty quickly. Yeah, it's compelling. And I guess to emphasize, we're not advocating for zero regulation here. We're advocating for common sense regulation that isn't excessively onerous. And yeah, maybe that could be something that happens in the future. But there will be, I think, because let's make the point, and the trends that are pushing your prices up. They don't seem to be abating anytime soon. I mean, I don't see there's no reversal of that increased gas price on the horizon anytime soon. I mean, all the momentum, I think, is just continuing. So you can expect, at least in the short term, that the forces that have pushed your prices up are just going to continue to push them up. So yeah, that's it's a challenging time and a challenging topic, but I think conversations like these are important to help educate people, to help them realize that if they want access to food that hasn't been treated with chemical, or that at least they want to know what happened to the animal. And we haven't even talked about animal welfare, but as you mentioned, that animal welfare of that processing in paddock is immeasurably greater because, as you mentioned, the cow died before it even knew what was happening to it, versus being transported in a beef bus, sent to semi-double truck all the way to the abattoir and then going through that process, which is not nice at all. So yeah, I mean, a lot to be said. I want to quickly, we'll keep this to an hour, so we won't talk too much longer. But I had a really enjoyable interview with Dirk, who is a Nguni farmer breeder in Botswana, and the kind of stuff that he was telling me was very, very, very interesting. And the resilience of these animals to thrive in this Botswana is fascinating. I'm presuming you heard that interview, and did you have any particular thoughts?
Yeah, I listened to that interview, and I think he was transitioning from, was it Drakensberger or another?
But he was he was farming with Bonsmara, and I had to
Onsmara, that's
research
right.
Bonsmara, and I'll quickly make a mention for the listeners. Bonsmara sounds like it was an academic who tried to plan the perfect breed, a top-down attempt at engineering in Mother Nature to breed Shorthorn with some indigenous genetics. Anyway, Dirk used what was supposed to be this amazing breed for the conditions, and then found pretty quickly that it was not what it was cracked up to be.
Yeah, it was a really interesting interview, and I really appreciated his takeaways. And it sounds like the environment he's farming on, especially when he's talking about the leopard pressure on his farms and how they're killing all the neighbors' bulls and everything. I can't even, the worst thing we've got is a fox that might come and take a chicken. There's no predator that threatens a 700 kilo animal on our farm in our landscape. Just going to bed at night knowing that's a possibility must be a really strange feeling to have as a farmer and animal manager. I can't quite get there, but I listened to that interview and I got fired up about Nguni. And I'm a complete advocate, Nguni advocate, and that just got me so G'd up. We had a film crew here doing a piece on the farm last weekend, and about a dozen of them, and we all went out in the paddock to look at the Nguni, and because we've got them all here at the home farm at Wamagama now. And, there is just something about the energy of these, and this is their words. These people that aren't farmers, they were just here as an interest piece. They said there is something about the energy of being around these animals that's just really compelling. And I thought, there is something that's a little bit untenable. And I think it comes a little bit from how close these animals are to wild. And what I mean by that is how close they are to just being a raw product of their environment and natural selection. Like, you go to a zoo and you see a lion, and even though it's been domesticated and it might be a little bit sad being in the cage, there is just this primal, vibrant energy that comes from these animals. And the Nguni has that on the landscape. And Max, you and I spoke about this, I believe it was on our last Doctor and the Farmer chat. But, we've just come through a pretty dry period with a lot of pressure put on the animals. And, our animals work for us. We don't work for them. So I didn't completely pamper them with exotic and expensive grains and grasses being imported for them. I gave them the bare minimum to keep them going. And it was a really interesting experiment watching which breeds performed and which animals performed and which animals didn't, because we've got a range, we're breeding up. So we've still got some Shorthorns and Herefords and Angus and Jerseys and all these different things, Drought Masters. And while all these other animals were slipping under pressure and just losing a little bit of body condition and no one got sick or unhealthy, but just going through a little bit of a dry spell, the Ngunis glowed and they'd never looked better. And it was, just such an interesting thing to observe. And then as the person charged with caring for these animals, it was such a nicer experience caring for the Ngunis and watching them thrive versus watching, I'd got 2 drought master cows in my paddock and they just borderline fell to bits. And you looked at them and it was just a little bit sad. The state, we fed them a bit of hay and we got them through. And now already we're still in winter and everyone's fat as mud because we've had a bit of rain and we've had a bit of grass come through. But it was harder mentally to care for these other animals. It was a joy to care for the Nguni through this high pressure system.
Yeah, what we talked about on the last episode was this is the breed for farmers' mental health, because you don't need to mollycoddle them. You don't need to do anything essentially. And Dirk mentioned in his the last time he had to have a pull calf was 8 years prior, and he's running a pretty sizable herd of Nguni cattle. Yeah, what he talked about again, it's not really relevant to Australian conditions, but wild dog pressure, leopard pressure, hyenas, cheetahs. It sounds like you actually want the leopards, because if you get rid of the leopards, then the cheetahs come and they kill more of your cattle. But I think what he mentioned was that his neighbor was running a polled cattle breed. So I believe it was Senestopol or so, I can't remember, but they don't have horns. And these, I believe he lost 7 of these bulls, whereas Dirk didn't even lose one female cow, and he attributed that to the fact that they had horns, and they were therefore able to defend themselves. But very, very exciting, and our mutual friend who you sourced a lot of your Nguni genetics, Edwin Rouse, he keeps us updated with photos of new calf drops, and they all look like amazing creatures. I've visited Edwin, and they're special animals to be walking around and seeing them. It's great to spend time in their presence, because there is something. I think the French say je ne sais quoi. It's something that you don't know quite exactly what it is, but there's definitely a special energy about those animals.
We're also really excited this year, Max. We've got our first crop of Nguni shorthorn cross calves or growers that'll be going through the butchery. So to date, we've processed maybe half a dozen pure blood Nguni and offered them to consumers through our mailing list and website and social media page, whatever else. But, generally in the background, we're mainly just processing our shorthorns that we were breeding before we made the transition. Well, I've got a bunch of Nguni shorthorn first cross steers. I've got about 20 or 25 of them that'll start to be ready for processing probably come October this year, and we'll have all of them put through by December. So I'm really looking forward. It's not a pure Nguni product, but it's half-half, and they look a lot more like an Nguni than a shorthorn. It's a very dominant genetic infusion there, and we're really excited about offering that because people are desperate for it. Everyone that's had some Nguni raves about it and wants more. And it's not the most aesthetically Instagrammable cut of meat. Everyone on your timeline comes up all these ridiculous Wagyu, hyper marbled, big fall off the edge of the plate rump cuts and all this stuff. The Nguni cuts of steak are a bit smaller because they're a smaller animal. We're looking for a nice fat calf and a little bit of marbling, but it's not a heavily marbled breed. But something that's really actually challenged me a little bit is how much flavor it has, because I'm a meat enthusiast and I'm a fat enthusiast. I literally sell jarred fat. It's a big part of my business, and I believe it's good for people. And you and I both know, Max, that fat is flavor. So when we're eating beef that doesn't have as much fat in it, but it's still got a lot of flavor, it really spun me out a little bit, to the point where we talked about our friend agronomist Dr. David Bushell, who I just actually had a missed call from. He was trying to ring me while I was talking to you. he sold me 2 yearling bulls, so the Hereford breed, and they're 12-month-old bulls. So not conventionally old enough to process, but way older than what a Vila would be. And we put them through the butchery and we marketed it as bull beef, and there was absolutely 0% marbling and almost no fat cap on it, because when you've got a bull growing out, the testosterone is putting all of the growth into muscle development, and there's no fat reserves on these animals. And it should be tough and chewy and bland. That is, or stinky even, have a taint to it. That's the common accepted taste of a bull. Well, we sold both of those animals, and I don't think I've ever had such good feedback consistently on a product. And the feedback, Max, was tender and deep, rich flavor. And, this stuff's hard to sell because you get online, because we're not in the market of pulling the wool over people's eyes. I'm saying yearling Hereford bull, just weaned off mum, come buy some bully beef. And everyone's like, what is this? This doesn't really, no, we know that tastes stinky and chewy, but the few people that went out on a limb and bought it came back and bought another box because it was beautifully tender and had a lot of flavor. And just once again, challenging the paradigm and the status quo and showing us that we really have no idea what we're talking about.
There is a lot of food intelligence that has been lost, and ancestral traditional cultural traditions of eating all kinds of foods that are looked down upon in this Western world and in Western culture. And if it's not a highly marbled rib fillet, then people just turn their nose up. Or, I mean, it's so evidently wrong when you delve into some of the stuff that you've been talking about. And yeah, the taste is amazing. So yeah, let's wrap this up. And all that to say, it's exciting, and I hope look forward to maybe tasting some of that Nguni cross that you're going to drop soon. For those who are listening and want to try Jake's beef, you can go onto his website, walkyfarm.com.au, and if you use the code Dr. Max, DRMAX, then you'll get 10% off your entire order. And Jake is shipping nationally. So find a local farmer if you want, wherever you are. But if you don't have access to that, then definitely buy off Jake and get that discount. And for those who are in the Albury, Canberra, Melbourne area, come and meet Jake and I on the 3rd and 4th of August at Regenerate Albury. This is going to be a fantastic weekend. So we've still got tickets available. And yeah, it's going to be great. So let us know if you enjoyed this in the comments. This is usually only for our private membership groups, but I'm going to put this out publicly this month. But yeah, give us any feedback or talk about, post any questions that you want us to discuss, perhaps for next time. But Jake, thank you for your time. And yeah, I think people will enjoy this. And just I think it's a very timely and relevant insight into primary production as it relates to health and regenerative farming. So yeah, I will see you in a couple of weeks in Albury. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, be good to see you, Max. And I'll look forward to presenting at Regenerate next month.
Fantastic.